Unraveling the Secrets, where we explore the connecting links between the pernicious deeds of a group of secret society outlaws who are creating a tightly controlled world society with them as bosses and you and I as slaves to their system, popularly known as the New World Order. Research indicates that most of the unexplained craft we see in our skies are from somewhere on or inside our planet. This led to research of the hollow earth and subterranean theories in the 1980s and 90s, which in turn led to the realization that the answers we seek are in the control of a number of elitist groups and secret societies that we call collectively the Controllers. Even a quick look at recent world events should convince anyone that the Controllers' plan is working very well. It is these things we explore on this radio show. Join us as we work towards unraveling the secrets.
Is everybody out there? Come on, turn up the volume. This is Tim Beckley. I'm here with Carla Anderson and the Jackal down in Miami, and we're getting ready to go with another episode of Unraveling the Secrets. Woot, woot. It's that time of the week, and I've been waiting for this weekend in particular because I got two of my homies on the show tonight. These are my best buddies in all of ufology. And today we gotta stick together because there are those out there who'd like to trash us, right, guys?
I concur, my friend. I concur.
I've got from upstate New York, I've got Peter Robbins, and way out
Brooklyn!
there, got way out there in Texas, Nick Redfern!
Yay!
And we are going, it's baseball season, so we're going to bat it around. We're going to throw out subjects, and we're going to get everybody's opinion on the subject. And then we're going to go into the dugout and beat each other up. Because
What's the phone number? What's the phone number to call in, sweetie?
Well, if you want to call in, please do so at 786-245-8127. Again, that's 786-245-8127. Doesn't matter if you're north, west, east, or south of the equator. If you're even on Pluto, you call that number, you'll get right in the show.
How about if you're on Uranus?
It might be a backdoor entry, but it'll still get you in the show.
There you go. We take calls from everywhere. I've got two books in my hand. I've got Nick Redfern's latest.
That's more books than I've read. Continue.
That's right. I've got Secret History, Conspiracies, and Ancient Aliens to the New World Order. And, you know, you're getting to be like me, Nick. You put the more words you put in the title, the better it is, right? There you go. That's Nick's latest, Secret History, Conspiracies from Ancient Aliens to the New World Order. And we're going to talk about that. And then in my other hand, I'm holding up a book that I worked on myself. It's called Shirley MacLaine Meets the Palladians, the amazing flying saucer experiences of celebrities, rock stars, and the rich and famous. That would be all of us here, right, guys?
Nice. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No,
we're going to be discussing this book because there is
ufology for the money.
There you go. Yeah. There's a very exciting chapter in here. It's a book about celebrities, some of whom I've interviewed, going way back because I was a stringer for the Notorious Inquirer, The Star, The Tatler, and People, which has nothing to do with the People magazine that's on the stands today. This was another tabloid out of Chicago. But I got to interview a lot of celebrities, and one of the questions I always ask them is whether they had a UFO or a paranormal experience. Now, one of the chapters in the book is about Peter Robbins' sister, Helen Wheels, the queen of punk rock, who, when she was a teenager, is that correct? You were both teenagers, Peter, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. She was 12, I was 14.
Okay, well, that fits right in. And they had a UFO experience in Long Island, and Helen was taken on board the craft. So that kind of started Peter's involvement in the field. And, of course, today we know He is a well-known lecturer, a speaker. He's on the radio and TV almost every night of the week. For the big bucks, we're only we're only in it for the money. That's
right. Making
I
a big
spray my
deal.
wrist endorsing checks. I know Nick does too.
Woo, man.
Only Jaime Maussan gets the big bucks.
Oh.
That's there you go.
Sí, es verdad. Sí.
Yes. And so we're going to be talking about their Peter and Helen's experience. Now, unfortunately, Helen isn't here to collaborate the story because she has passed on, and that is a story in itself. And we're also going to talk about Jackie Gleason's reported experience in seeing the little men, the Martians, the creatures, whatever you want to call them, from Roswell. Now, so the Roswell UFO slides is nothing new. Jackie Gleason and Richard Nixon got to see them up close and personal. And Peter's going to tell us a little bit about this story because his buddy, Larry Warren, is the one who talked to Jackie Gleason and got the story firsthand.
Yep.
And away we go. Nick, so tell us, what is this book all about? Secret History, Conspiracies from Ancient Aliens to the New World Order. It's a thick one. This thing, my God, I've already got up to 400. Let's see, it's 440 pages, and it's got every conceivable subject in the world in here. In fact, I'm just opening the book, and here's a photograph of George Adamski and Orthon, the little guy, and there's Moses on the next page. So everybody, and there's a very young Stanton Friedman. Yeah, there it is. So, hey, tell us a little bit give us a sales pitch for this. What is this all about?
Well, basically, it's very different to all the other books I've done, which are like on just one particular subject, one particular case. The new book is sort of a study of conspiracy theories throughout history, and some of them are no paranormal angle at all. For example, there are chapters on, was there a conspiracy around the death of Abraham Lincoln? Did Adolf Hitler survive the Second World War? Who was Jack the Ripper? Area 51, even the disappearance of MH370. So it's right up to date. So in other words, it's a study of conspiracies, counter-conspiracies, and secrets, and sort of secrets upon secrets, if you like, to hide historical events. And so in that sense, it does deal with, some weird stuff like the ancient alien stuff in the first section, but then a lot of it is sort of political and historical conspiracy-based material.
I got to ask you both this. What is your opinion on Jonah and the whale being abducted by an ET?
Oh, I just got a headache in my eye. I'm sorry. Keep going. Don't mind me.
Okay.
Well, this is a chapter on that in the
yes,
book.
it's on page 102. Yes.
Yeah. I think when you can interpret it from that perspective. The idea that if you look at it literally, the idea of Jonah getting swallowed by a whale and actually managed to survive in the belly of the whale for several days, that's sort of stretching things beyond their limit, But what I find interesting is that there are a number of alien abduction stories where people report being taken on board craft and placed into sort of like a liquid environment. Mm-hmm. Now, that might come into play with the story of Jonah in the belly of the whale, sort of splashed around inside the belly. That
could be like an underwater a USO.
Yeah, and the liquid, inside the belly could actually be, as I said, with people who talk about abductions and being placed in tanks with liquid, but still able to breathe, as if it's perhaps it'll be something to do with preventing G-forces affecting them. Who knows? So, there is an interesting analogy there.
Somebody sounds like they're snoring. Is it just me or?
Well, I don't know.
Peter, are you there?
I fell completely asleep there. I'm back now, though.
Whoa, there you go, Peter.
Yeah. Okay. All's
hey,
good.
Okay. Well, this is a good place to start it off. Let's start with Peter. What is your opinion on ancient aliens, ancient astronauts? Now, we're forced to watch these shows over and over and over on the History Channel till they come out our I was going to say ears. Well, we'll keep it to the upper anatomy for the moment. And some of the shows are interesting, and some of them are just a little bit over the top. But UFOs in history and in the Bible, do you think that's really that really happened, or is it are the vivid imagination of Giorgio Tsoukalos and
His hair.
Van Duniken.
and Von Daniken
Von Duniken.
Von Daniken.
Yeah,
Peter, you
okay.
hit this first. Go ahead.
They're starting
Like a
again,
lot
right?
of people, I stumbled on a used copy of Chariots of the Gods probably in the early mid-'70s, shortly after my interest activated when my childhood memory returned, which truly had been repressed from that day when Helen and I had our sighting and she had her incident in 1975. I think that the basic premise is absolutely sound. It's naive to think that they've been coming and going since 1947 or 1941, or choose your year. If they're a presence and, they're hundreds of thousands of years ahead of us, and some of them are hundreds of thousands of years ahead of them, or millions or whatever, we're just a stop on the way between here and there. I think the problem comes when we are asked to make greater and greater leaps of
getting
faith.
louder.
When I read Ezekiel, that rings true for me. And is that a dog growling, or
I don't know. What the hell's going on with it?
highly
That's
technical?
Oh, that's I think that's Carla.
It could.
Every ancient book has stories that we can interpret as a very potential misinterpretation of advanced technology in the eyes and the traditions and the legends and myths of ancients. However, my problem comes when, I think the show Ancient Aliens, which has had some great episodes, is a victim of the fact that they named it Ancient Aliens. You can only get so many tenable cases before we're asked to look at a cave drawing from Australia that's 19,000 years old with lines coming out of the head and big black eyes, and in Georgie's inimitable words, it's aliens. In my thought, it might just be sticks coming out of an armature and charcoal around the eyes. In the words of the great Judge Judy, don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. I think there's just such an overload. And with the internet frenzy on anything strange and unusual that's just become de rigueur now, real casework, I think, is left behind for so much over speculation.
Well, that I would agree with you there. I mean, the premise that, you say visited. These beings, these entities, these energies, whatever you want to identify them with, I call them the ultra-terrestrials because can't prove that they're extraterrestrials. They obviously have been interfering, interloping, and operating within our atmosphere since time was recorded. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Well, we can speak about, Nick, did you write up the story about Enoch?
Well, yeah, I actually mentioned it in there, but I agree actually with Peter. I think there's the important thing, or the significant thing about ancient alien stories is, drawing the parallel. Well, is it actually this or is it that? And I think the big problem with resolving issues relative to the ancient alien scenario is that you can look at things from very different angles. And a classic case in point is the Nazca lines. Where we've had people say they're, landing strips, which they're clearly not. But the fact is that they can be seen far greater from above and interpreted from above. Now, does that mean ancient aliens saw them above, or was it simply they were built like that for the gods that they believed, were in the heavens above? So in other words, all of this is very much sort of open to interpretation one way or another. And I think that's intriguing, but it's also problematic as well.
Well, I tell you, one of the things that I'm not into, because the Anunnaki, before Zachariah Stitchin wrote about the Anunnaki and the return of Planet X and his, what was the first book, Genesis, or that he wrote? Oh, anyway, it doesn't matter. Before he wrote about the Anunnaki, you never heard a word about them. Now, everybody, how many books, if we went to Amazon and typed in Anunnaki, how many books would we get on the subject? How many experts are there on the subject? How does everybody suddenly know about the Anunnaki when they couldn't possibly read even the tablets that any of this is written on, what do they have to go on? Just because somebody else wrote about it previously, they suddenly are experts on the subject. So I don't even like to bring up Anunnaki or Planet X because I don't see the relevance in it.
I completely agree.
The one person who we could interview on the subject who probably would tell you to read his books, because I remember attending a lecture that Zachariah Stitchin gave, actually right next door to where I'm sitting now, was the meeting hall of the New York Fortean Society, which John Keel was the head of, and I was on the board of directors. And Zachariah Stitchin came down one day to discuss the topic, except he really didn't discuss the topic, because anytime anybody would ask him something about what he had written in the audience, he'd say, read my books.
Yeah, he was a tough old bird, and he not only did not suffer fools lightly, he suffered no one who had not read his books. He was a character. He was a true scholar. I'm proud to say that when I was a nobody, just getting started on Left at East Gate with Larry Warren back in the later 80s, strange thing. UFOs were not his thing per se, and the Rendlesham Forest incident, to put it mildly, as well. But he kind of took me under his wing. Maybe it was sort of the Russian-Jewish connection. But we went out to dinner, went out to lunch every once in a while, and he was very encouraging. I learned a lot from his first book, The 12th Planet, which
that's right.
I found fascinating. But I think Zachariah, as well as Giorgio, as well as Eric, asked us to take greater and greater leaps of faith as he continued to publish books. Maybe it's, a casualty of becoming a highly specialized person in that area. Again, certain cases for me ring incredibly true, and other ones not so much.
Well, what would be the cases that ring incredibly true? Are we talking about like Ezekiel's wheel?
Well, at a point, it's got to be about 20 years ago, Tim. I go off on JAG sometimes, and I get caught up on tangents. At one point, I actually got, I think, 6 or 7 different Bibles. The King James Version, the one that I was given when I was bar mitzvahed. I literally went through them line by line, reading Ezekiel. Translations very much the same. And essentially we've got a simple man, tending a sheep, as I recall, and out of the void, out of the sky, low, the clouds, open up, and there is a wheel within a wheel with the appearance of eyes all around and appearance of burnished beryllium, and it comes down, and it's not some gossamery, ethereal thing. It is metal, and out of it comes an angel. The original translation, the original meaning of the word angel, going back to the original Sumerian, has nothing to do with heaven or God or anything else. It's a word you would hear in the halls of power. It's essentially an emissary or a go-between. And it's got a metal head, and it has 4 faces, each a different animal's face coming off of it. Now, whether or not a mask like this would have been designed to blow the minds of the locals, or this was thought out, because one does get the sense that at that time the interactions with these other intelligences was more to impact on our philosophy, our culture, our sense of right and wrong and morality, to instill in us a fear of God, and that, if you did the right thing, that God would love you. But that very heavy part of monotheism. And if you read any of the translations, there is a highly technological aspect to it. For me, one of the most telling parts of that, and you guys probably are aware of it and have the book in your library, years ago, somebody was talking about just this point to a friend of theirs who happened to be a NASA systems designer. In fact, Joseph Blumridge actually worked on the first lunar lander, and being a space engineer, he thought it was absolute nonsense but he read Ezekiel, and he was apparently quite dumbstruck that the descriptions he was seeing were not unlike something that he was working on the design of for as a lunar lander. His book, The Spaceship of Ezekiel, is available. You can pick up a paperback for a couple of bucks online, and it's one everyone should read, especially intelligent skeptics, engineers, and anyone who wants to challenge the idea. I think that's one of the premier cases as far as ancient visitations go.
So you would say then that the Bible does have episodic or incidents of visitations that
Oh, yes.
they're not just
Oh, yes,
but,
the same way the Upanishads does, and literally every ancient religious text. Now, again, we may be dealing with allegories, analogies, legends, myths, rechannelings of earlier stories from previous cultures, but if it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, and it squawks like a duck, sometimes it actually is a duck.
It could well be. Now, Nick, you're not a Bible thumper, as I take it. Although,
even though you all live in Texas,
yeah, that's right.
No,
but
I'm not.
Yeah.
But
So
what I
how-
would say... Oh, go on. No, go on.
No. Well, go ahead. You're
talk
talking.
over him, Nick.
You'll have
like
the
he'll never
microphone.
stop.
Yeah, I'm not a Bible thumper, but the only thing that sort of aggravates me about belief systems when it comes to religious is when they're sort of enforced on other people and somebody arrogantly says, well, my book's right and yours is 100% wrong and you need to change your ways. I don't care what people believe as long as it doesn't adversely affect other people. Now, what I would say is that, when Peter was talking about sort of allegories and things like this, the idea that if you read the Bible and a lot of these ancient texts, you do find that they all basically have the same themes, that in the distant past there was interaction between the human race and some form of higher entities that were able to perform, miracles or, strange manifestations in the sky and that kind of thing. And I think that very issue alone is important, because whether you put a spin on it that it's, or not a spin, but whether you believe it was, the interaction of the gods or a god, a deity, or if you think it was extraterrestrials, I think when you look at stories, legends, parables, etc., what you find is that there's generally like a core truth at the heart of them. So I think that's why it's important to study these ancient biblical accounts, not necessarily to take them literally, but to try and figure out, like Blumrich did in Spaceships of Ezekiel, try and figure out, hey, is there actually some truth behind this, which may have been, not deliberately, but inadvertently distorted by the witness, because they really had no idea what they were seeing, so they were only able to talk about it and describe it according to their abilities at that particular time. So, I think all of these ancient books are incredibly valuable for what they potentially could tell us. And I think that's why we need to study them, to see if it is going to throw more light on the whole ancient aliens angle, or, will people go down a path more of a religious way? But clearly, all of it, when you find that these books, from India, from the Middle East, and then you have Native American lore, South American legends, when all of these different cultures and people have stories of these fantastic beings coming down, and there's a worldwide thread with, reportedly a lot of these nations never ever meeting each other and crossing paths, you've got to really pay attention to that and recognize that as I think, something strange happened, but I don't feel the need to sort of force feed down somebody's throat the idea that it was this, and if you don't believe it was this, you're going to burn for the rest of eternity,
Yeah, we don't. We'll only burn for half of eternity, so that's not too bad. Hey, Carla, are you there, Carla? No, Carla has disappeared.
Call EMS. I think she really has passed out.
Yeah, Carla went night.
Oh.
She's unraveling a different kind of secret.
Yeah, that's
right.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
You know what, Nick? What's always interested me. There was a book Bromley wrote. Now it was a book that had Eden in the title. Do you remember the exact title?
Gods of Eden.
Okay, it's a very interesting book. I remember reading it many years ago. Of course, now he took a rather negative viewpoint on the visitation in ancient times by these entities. I mean, he didn't see it as a very positive thing. To him, I don't think there were any angels in the attic. And one of the subjects that he spoke about, I remember seeing him interviewed on I think perhaps on Ancient Aliens about this, and you've written about it, is the plagues of Egypt and also the plagues from the middle century. I mean, he actually believes, I think, that these plagues were caused by extraterrestrials or ultra-terrestrials. I remember him saying that the first arrival of the Grim Reaper was during the plague, where hundreds of thousands of people probably literally died. Had you investigated any of that at all?
Peter, do you want to go first? Peter?
Peter! I think he fell asleep too. Oh, no.
I'm such a good host.
My cat was talking to me, and I had to talk back to the cat.
I often speak to feline also myself.
I put everybody at ease.
Yeah, always. No, I have not looked into that in any serious research way. And you, Nick?
Well, I do talk about it in the book, but from
that's a great
more
answer.
speculative perspective of looking at, is it possible that some of these plagues could have been, like a genetically created or altered virus, something like an extraterrestrial virus or manipulation of a terrestrial virus to wipe out, certain people. A lot of people don't realize that in the last few years, a great deal of research has been undertaken into an extremely disturbing area of biological warfare, and it's basically known as race profiling viruses and biological warfare. The idea of actually being able to target a specific race, a specific body of people with a virus that won't affect other people. That gets down really controversial areas. Now, if you read things like H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, the aliens are killed by the flu virus. They have no combat against the common cold. Then you have movies like and novels, Michael Crichton's The Andromeda Strain, about a spacecraft that comes back to the Earth and essentially kicks off a virus that has the potential to wipe out the human race. If you could potentially at least design a virus, maybe that has a bearing on, the stories of the plagues, plagues of Egypt, all that kind of thing, firstborn dying. Maybe it wasn't just a legend, and maybe it wasn't literally a case of God, doing this or doing that. Perhaps it was somebody, a highly advanced alien extraterrestrial, well versed in genetics and viruses.
Well, one of the things that NASA has, if a spaceship lands, you're supposed to keep your distance and report it to them.
Yes.
Is one of the reasons it's actually illegal, I believe, to go up and make yourself welcome to an ET, because you might actually be spreading have the potential of spreading some extraterrestrial virus that could wipe out the entire planet. So keep that in mind. In fact, maybe that's the one reason that they often surround their ship with a force field, is because they know that we shouldn't approach them. Maybe there is something to that. I remember. You remember the story about the two guys from Pascagoula, of course, Calvin Parker and
Charlie Hickson, my old friend.
Charlie Hickson.
I visited down there.
Well, now, I always had some faith in that story. There, it's always touted as one of the highly regarded abduction experiences. But many years ago, and I can't tell you the exact year, Calvin Parker broke his silence, and he actually came with a couple of, let's call them handlers, to one of my conferences, and I believe it was Phoenix, and he actually spoke on his experience, probably one of the few times, and I wish I had a copy of the of the tape, but I don't have it. Anyway, he told this really what I considered whack-a-ding-hoy story about how when he and Charlie were taken into the craft, he was taken into a separate compartment, and there was a naked alien there, a woman, if I remember correctly, and she told him, she told him in the midst of some congenial, how would I put this? Well, they were messing around. Anyway, she happened to mention that AIDS was some sort of extraterrestrial virus or what what have you. And I always thought that kind of lowered the caliber of the story, and I kind of believe less in it now than I did before. I wouldn't rank that now so high up.
For what it's worth, Tim, I did spend time with Charlie Hicks and Larry as well down in Mississippi, and the fact is, Bud Hopkins had very strong feelings about this. He felt that Calvin, and this is, it's just human nature in some cases. He was a younger guy. These are country guys. They're not really sophisticated. That Calvin's fuses had been really overloaded on this, that he had something of a breakdown and did not want to admit, the loss of power, and that he created this alternate scenario that was much more storybook. Charlie stuck to his guns, though, right to his death. And I believe him.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just simply, a lot of these, I'm a journalist. I mean, that's how I see myself. In fact, that's one of the reasons that I kind of get along with everybody in this field, or pretty much everybody, is because I don't necessarily have to take a stand on something. Here's what you told me, and I try to relate it to people who are interested in hearing of these things as reliably and forthright as I can, without changing your meaning or your describing your experience. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't necessarily have an opinion, because people ask me what my opinion is, and you know what I tell them? I said, when it comes to UFOs, it really doesn't matter what my opinion is or what your opinion is, because UFOs act independently of all of our opinion.
Yes.
And just when you think you might have, discovered something or unraveled a secret, as we like to say here on the PSN network, you're fooled again. The trickster comes out and hands you a curveball or a sinker, and so it goes on, just as in the case of the ill-fated Roswell alien slides. And I figure that if there's any truth to the scenario about the mythical trickster, he was in the back of that auditorium laughing his ass off.
Yeah.
And so let's touch on this for 5 minutes and then get on to something else, because I think at this point only Jaime Maussan is left holding the bag and thinking that it could be an actual extraterrestrial here, because now as early as January 26th, I actually posted on the internet a photograph of a Native American Indian mummy, and I realized that there was a very great similarity. Never mind the number of ribs and so forth. I mean, how could you even count that in a photograph? I mean, to me, that's like that part of it is kind of preposterous. Saying, well, it's got to be an extraterrestrial because it doesn't look like what I would conceive a child mummy to look like. Go ahead, Peter. You first.
And
Hello?
I think he fell asleep again. Hey, Peter.
The fact is that we looked at those photos, and
one of those nights.
I don't know. My first thought was that it was a sideshow shot. There's a great quote attributed to Hermann Goering, Reich's Minister of Culture, that I always liked, which translates as, "When I hear the word culture, I reach for my pistol." When I hear about a photograph of an alien in a glass box or an alien looking in a window, I reach for mine allegorically. And to build this huge event around these very tenuous bits of what I'll call evidence It was sort of human folly, and kind of a case of mass delusion in a way. I like Jaime very much as a person, nice guy. I really admire his enthusiasm, but he has put things forward that I consider incredibly sensational and not proven fact. Again, I'm a total pragmatist. I work with hard evidence as much as possible. I pride myself where I can in presenting research that you could at least bring some of into a court of law in terms of the kinds of evidence that attach to it. Obviously, we're in an area of study where there's so much stuff that you can't do that with, but it's sort of a rush to judgment, I felt, and something that, of course, a lot of people are laughing up their sleeves or making fun of the entire area of study of UFOs because of this event. And that's a shame. I mean, it'll get over it and things will move on. But I think it's much ado about not an awful lot, and it's a shame.
And Nick, would you ratify that with your own assessment?
Yeah, I agree with what Peter said. What I would add to that is that what angers me and puzzles me is when the slides were shown in Mexico, literally the whole house of cards collapsed within, which was on the Tuesday, it was all over by the very latest, the Saturday, and within a couple of days after that we had apologies from Tony Bragalia and then Don Schmidt. Well, this was May 2015. The issue of the slides had been in circulation, for like 2.5 years, and people have been looking at it behind the scenes before all of us got to see it. What I haven't had a satisfactory answer to is if the whole thing can be resolved in 4 days, 5 days max after the unveiling of the slides, why couldn't that have been done in that 2-year period in which everything was behind the scenes?
Yeah.
I mean, 2 years is a hell of a long time. And using, the technology that allows the blurry text to be seen as it is, that's valid technology. And the other thing is that when you look at that high-res one, well, right behind it, there's like an animal's head the other side, clearly showing, it's in some sort of display or museum, and so why wasn't that issue discussed, say, 2.5 years ago, along the lines of, if it was me and Peter who'd got it and we were showing it, I'm sure both of us would have said, well, what's that other head behind it,
Yeah.
And I don't understand how or why if the whole thing can be wrapped up in 5 days, it takes, after 2 years, the team that looked at it, they couldn't do likewise. And I think that's why a lot of people are justifiably angry.
Yes.
You have people who paid good money to watch it on the internet, or who literally flew down to Mexico, or people in Mexico who drove out to where it was put on. And I think there'd be less anger if it was a really complex case and it took another 10 years and it was resolved then as a mummy. People would say, well, okay, they put all the effort in and everything. But I can understand why people are angry. It's because they paid out all this money.
Yes.
And literally within hours or days, literally, handful of hours, handful of days, it was all over. That is all, to me, that's outrageous. These people got charged all this money and it collapsed within a week. I think that's what a lot of people are angry about. The one last thing, Peter can, go back. Yeah. We can go back to Peter then. One last thing I would just say is that the big irony is that this was meant to open up more on Roswell. I think it will now actually have the exact opposite effect, whereas if anybody else sort of comes forward on Roswell with regard to photographs of strange bodies, even possibly testimony of, my grandfather this, etc., etc., people are going to look at it very warily. And I think the worst angle of all is the fact that, to me, I still believe something very, very weird happened at Roswell, and I'm sure Peter does. And that's the big irony, is that this is going to impact negatively on a case that is still valid.
Yeah, Nick is absolutely correct. And it's, I use the word tragedy. This event was really geared to spectacle rather than scholarship. It was an event. It was a happening, as we would have said in the 60s. And the fact that, from what we understand, nobody's come out with a figure yet, but in terms of the pay-per-view aspect alone, there's a lot of money that we're talking about that a small number of people made putting something together that, in the words of my late great-grandmother, was all bluff and no stuff as far as I'm concerned. And, who are any of us to say what is or isn't absolutely factual? If there's a 1% chance that this is what Jaime and the scientists that he is, teamed up with, that there is something truly anomalous to this poor little dead critter in the glass box, I'll apologize profusely in the future. However, to tag poor Roswell and drag it in is a bit of a travesty. Nick is one of the few people in the field who has had the courage to go up against the ufological establishment. And I remember it well because I was working for the city of Roswell
that you were,
for
yes.
3 years. It was about the coolest job, one of the coolest jobs I ever had. It involved trying to build with the dear old mayor, who has replaced twice now with mayors that don't care about this subject, to put it mildly, responsible UFO-related tourism. I was the city of Roswell's liaison on anything UFO-related with the office of Governor Richardson, which I was back and forth with them a number of times between 2007 and 2010. And I also helped to organize the conferences, and I was instrumental in bringing in Nick Redfern at one point for one of the conferences, and he had guts. He presented a completely alternate terrestrial theory built on, an advanced German test craft, a case of a physiologically freakishly ill individual whose body was misinterpreted, and a perfect storm of confluences. I thought Nick made the best argument for that alternate theory that I had ever heard. I remain in the camp that feels, as Stanton Friedman would say, the gray box, and that it was something genuinely anomalous. But to tag Roswell with it, especially with the decades of hard work and solid research that a handful of really respected people have put into it, is a shame. I spent last weekend in part of it in Erie, Pennsylvania, speaking at a MUFON conference, and the other best billed speaker was Don Schmidt. And Don showed a lot of character. He spent the entire first part of his talk talking about how he had kind of lost his direction briefly in this thing and been pulled into it in part. It's kind of the embodiment of the wonderful Fox Mulder poster. It's not, I want to understand, I want to learn, I want the evidence. It's, I want to believe. We all have a longing for this being the epitome of these events, for things like this to be so. Some of them likely are, some of them aren't. And I spent the Sunday night, I stayed over at my friend Rich Dolan's on this last Sunday night, and we talked about this long into the night as well. Rich, who has done so much good work over the last decade plus,
has he gotten flack over this? And
he has,
undeservingly so, because
completely.
I mean, look at my career, which is certainly more tainted than anybody, or at least like
good point.
At least I get accused of that. But I don't put myself up. I don't have the smoking gun.
Yeah.
Or maybe I do. Actually, if anybody has the smoking gun, I probably got it here somewhere in these 40 file cabinets.
Well, you may have a real gun that is smoking, not an allegory.
Well, that's because I'm in New York.
Right. Rich's basic argument was when he was invited, he accepted because they wanted a historian there. Of course, it would lend credence if he believed in it and, came down on that side. But his basic reason for accepting would have been the reason that I would have accepted if Jaime sent me a ticket and promised me an honorarium, which I would have been curious. Plus, and I make no bones about this, one of the few real perks in this crazy work is occasionally, for me, for Nick, we get to go to some interesting places. I've never been to Mexico City. I've never been to a UFO-related event of such proportion and theatrics. I would just been sociologically curious as hell. But yeah, Rich has really been attacked on this by people who are in the category of what I term, and it's my word and it's patented, folks, so send me a dime every time you use it, ankle biters, people who sit there at their computer screens, pontificate, who have added nothing to the work, but love to see people take a fall who have done their best to establish a reputation. This will pass. I saw a post about this is going to destroy Rich Dolan's career. Please, the only person who will ever, if ever, destroy Rich Dolan's career is Rich if he wants to get on to another career. He is one of our greatest scholars. He's a heck of a nice guy, and his work continues to contribute to what we know about it. He's also, I would call, a vanguard thinker in the work. But, you know, he's open to all the possibilities. Again, there's a lot of collateral damage on this. And my basic philosophy on it is, right, I get it. Let's talk it out a bit and then get on with things. There's important work to be done for all of us.
Well, you know, I think we should point out is that alien bodies tend to rise to the surface from time from time to time. This is certainly not the first time that an alien body or an alien mummy has raised its head from out of the sand. Now, I was editor for 11 years.
We're coming up to a break, Tim.
Okay, how many minutes? All right.
About 2, 3, 4 minutes.
All right. Well, when I was editing UFO Universe and its sister publications for about 11 or 12 years, I think I published at least 3 or 4 articles, maybe even more, that had photos with them of alien bodies. I remember one alien body that was being touted as being legitimate by Marina Popovich, the Russian cosmonaut.
Yes.
Well, this was, I hate to say it, it was a rubber dummy. And I published it on the back of the magazine in color because I had a nice color print, and it was UFO Universe. It's a newsstand magazine, and it's not a scientific journal by any means. But poor Antonio Huneeus took a little bit of flack over that because he supported it as being legitimate because it came from a credible source. So that's one alien that we quickly could say was not really an extraterrestrial. Then we had Ralph Lales, a little mummy that he took out from behind the counter at the Outer Space Museum up there in Brown Mountain. And that one, of course, was what we call a roadside attraction.
Delicately phrased.
and you can find these roadside attractions.
Sounds like my ex-girlfriend.
You can find these roadside attractions all over the country. If you are like me and you travel around and you like to stop in at little odd places along the highway, you will find all kinds of mummified creatures. My God, there are mermaids. Well, look at this. You talk about Ray Santilli and his alien autopsy. He got people, including scientists and people in the movie industry, to say this has to be an extraterrestrial, or it's a good chance it's an extraterrestrial, because you could not duplicate this without spending a lot of money. Well, that's nonsense, because I know teenagers who are 17 and 18 years old who have better aliens in their basement that they could have brought forward. So, and then there was the alien bodies that was found in a cave in by Jorge Martin in Puerto Rico, and then Jaime Maussan had the Mayapac alien that was caught in a trap, which I actually went to Toronto to be on the William Shatner show to say it could not have possibly been an extraterrestrial, but maybe it was a jinn. So there you go. Speaking of jinn. It's time for a break
and take drinks.
And we can have a gin, and then we'll come back and talk to our 2 guests this evening, Peter Robbins and Nick Redfern, and down in Miami where he's sweating it out is Angel. And this is Tim Beckley, and we'll be back in just a few minutes on Unraveling the Secrets. It's Unraveling the Secrets. And you can almost hear my heart fluttering. Well, maybe it's because I got a pacemaker, but it's also because we have tonight with us two of my favorite all-time ufologists. These are the guys that I like to pony up with and hang out with when I'm not doing this radio show or somebody else's radio show or some TV show, because actually I was just on the Travel Channel on 2 episodes of Mysteries in the National Parks, one on Joshua Tree and one on Hawaii. And I was the one on Joshua Tree was very good. They had the family, the descendants of George Van Tassel, and they visit the Integratron, and I was on for about 10 minutes. And as you guys know, in one of these History Channel or Travel Channel shows, to be on more than 30 seconds at a clip is like something that you could actually look forward to, because most of the time you're in and you're out, and you're lucky if you get your name stuck under your face there. So it was a good episode, and I'm sure that it's going to be repeated many times. But we've got Peter Robbins and we got Nick Redfern. And Peter, you were telling us during the break what you've got planned, that you're actually headed down to Roswell with some more slides.
Oh, God. No, I didn't say that. I don't have any slides, but I am going to be back in Roswell.
But I have slides I can lend you.
Oh, well, that's fine. I'll take them. And they will be Roswell slides, because I will be in Roswell back in July and looking very much forward to it. Okay, let me jump in here and relate a story as a passionate historian of the city of New York. The great P.T. Barnum, going back to about the Civil War, had a museum of curiosities on Lower Broadway, and that is where he made his first real killing. One of the exhibits that caused, how shall I say, a great deal of conflict, consternation, a certain amount of resentment, was a mermaid. And for an extra nickel, you could be ushered into a room, and there in the glass case was the mermaid, which was, of course, the top of a monkey sewed to the bottom of a fish. And people that saw it, some of them did see the stitching, and they became cross, and they wanted to take
They wanted their nickel back.
Yeah, they did want their nickel back, but being the genius that he was, he created a distraction, which was, as they were about to get really involved in getting caustic, they saw a sign which said, "This way to the egress." And not knowing what an egress is, they headed for it. And an egress is, I believe, based Latin word for an exit. And they went through the door to the egress, and the door closed behind them, and they were out in the street without their nickel after having seen the monkey fish mermaid. And there's a lesson in that for all of us. Now, going on to another serious subject, I was remembering that Tim and I go way back. I think we met in 1847 or thereabouts. And being lifelong New Yorkers, pretty much, once the friendship was established, it was thick as thieves. And
we get together at least twice a year for Indian food.
Not only that, but for most of my sister's shows at CBGB's, and it was a time where, well, how shall I say? No, I won't even say it because it's completely illegal and we'll get arrested in the time machine. But we really connected for the first time in my memory on a very wonderful drive back from Hamilton, New Jersey, where Pat Marcatilio used to have the International UFO Congress event before there was a real internet, in a motel there. And we were trading stories on the way back, and you told a story. It was you, me, Antonio, a couple other people in the car. I started to laugh so hard I almost wet myself. And you're doing a completely deadpan because you are an encyclopedia of every weird bit of minutia, and some of it actually proving not to be completely authentic, ever associated with the subject of UFOs. Go figure. These things happen. And it was a story about the alien pancake. Is it possible that in your adult mind you may still remember that story?
Well, but that's a famous story, and it really
well.
Took
there
place.
we go. Then please relate it to your audience.
Yes. It's Joe Symington. Right. He was a farmer out of Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. One morning he had gotten up and he was preparing to fix himself breakfast, and he was standing by the kitchen sink, I guess, which overlooked his back front porch, or I guess he lived in a rural area, and he notices something sitting there, a little bit further out than the front lawn, and it's glistening in the sun. So he says, "What the heck is this? Is it a car or some type of vehicle that he's never seen before?" So he goes out, and there's this egg-shaped object there, and apparently a ramp lowers down out of the craft. And he makes eye contact with these beings. Now, I don't remember how he described them, but I think they were fairly human looking. They would be the Nordics, or pretty close to Nordics. And he wanted to know what they were doing. And basically, they either motioned to him or told him telepathically that they were cooking. So I believe he went up the ramp. He went inside the ship, or regardless of whether he went into the craft or not, they asked him if he wanted some breakfast, and they gave him a couple of pancakes, or their own I guess a brand of bran flakes,
space
pancakes, whatever it was. Yes, and he took them, and he said they were kind of like cardboard, but he still had. There is a YouTube, if you type in UFO pancake or Joe Symington to that.
UFO pancakes. I like that.
You will see him. You will see him holding up the pancake, and I understand that one of them is actually talk about Roswell aliens in a glass case. I understand that in the cafeteria at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, there is actually, or there was at one point, a UFO display, and on display in this glass case next to the Roswell mummies, perhaps was one of Joe Symington's pancakes.
No.
So it's still there for all to see. But there have been other instances, Peter, where people
food?
where people have been handed.
You guys are getting me hungry. All these talk of pancakes. By the way.
Hey, weren't you having pancakes? Now that takes IHOP to a whole different level.
For real.
For real. But anyway, that's the alien. Yeah.
Can I just say something, Tim? Just to not to interrupt, but to interject. There's actually a really good brand new book out, which is literally came out like a week ago, published by Patrick Wegens and Dennis Stacy's Anomalous Books, and it's called The Trojan Feast by Joshua Cutchin. I'm about halfway through reading it. This is, I know Peter will love it. It's a really good book. It's and it looks at the entire spectrum of history of reports of sort of otherworldly entities giving people food and drink, and it covers everything from aliens to sort of 500-year-old reports of the so-called fairies and the little people, and it draws some really intriguing analogies. It kind of, in that sense, it's sort of same sort of territory that Jack Vallet's Messengers of Deception and Passport to Agonia cover, and he talks about the food and the drink angle. It's sort of split into different angles: food, drink, and people given pills. And very often, the drink or the pill is to initiate or to end the experience. And he has some interesting theories as to why this is, and the idea that these events may be sort of illusory to allow contact to occur, like legitimate contact, but the issue of sort of passing food is more of like a is like a visionary thing. But I mean, it's a really good book, and he covers all the major cases, like Whitley Strieber and a lot of other abductees being given sort of bitter tasting liquids during the course of these experiences. And this, I mean, I'm not just saying this, but I think this book would be sort of like the definitive study of, people who claim to have being forced to drink liquids or eat food, and he covers it in a really cool way. And I actually do think this will be like something akin to Passport to Magonia in terms of its importance and also, you know, the angles it covers and so on.
What an interesting specialty project. What a great idea.
Yeah,
you could go back to the time of the Bible, I guess, and include the manna that fell from the sky.
Mm.
Yeah.
Maybe that caused people to hallucinate.
In a manner of speaking.
Possibly. Anyway, send me a link on that, because I'd certainly like to have the author on to discuss this, because it's
a really good book.
It's we need more literature like that, you know, on the topic. And unfortunately, it's probably, even though you and I like the book, it's probably not one of the ones that will sell that well, because people got to be, you know, really into the topic to search it out. You know, I went to Amazon the other day and typed in UFO, and they've got about 14,000 books on the subject.
Good Lord.
Well, you know, and ghosts were like 8,000 or 9,000. I was surprised. I thought they might be a little bit more than UFOs even. And the total number of books on Amazon was like 4,300,000. And in the last 30 days, about 500,000 books, 90 days, about 500,000 books have been added. So how is one ever to find any title? It's almost impossible these days. I mean, you really got to huff and puff and sell them like Pat Marcatillo used to do out of the back of his station wagon.
What do you mean used to? I saw him last month, baby.
Is he still doing? Yeah. Okay.
Well, he actually, in all truthfulness, he was selling them in the hall for the conference, but he still does have the Mr. UFO, the Dr. UFO license plate.
There you go. Yeah, he used to come to my conferences and beat having to pay the little small fee for the vendors and sat out in the parking lot. But he was only selling the books for 25 and 50 cents, except if you had something that was really rare. And, you know, he'd slip me DVDs of some of the lectures and say, you know, put them up on YouTube. And
it's still one of my favorite characters in the whole field. What a positive, good, sweet guy. What a great character.
We actually had him on the program. It was the other show that I was co-hosting with Mike Mott and Tim Beckley with Tim Schwartz once a month, and he's a great guest and knows the subject very well too. And he travels around with his little UFO museum and art show and all of that, and it's a great time. And you know, I guess this is actually going to be the summer of UFO conferences, because down in Cleveland, Ohio, for the first time in many years, it's going to be the 51st annual meeting of the Congress of Scientific Ufologists, or the National UFO Conference, whatever you call it.
Oh, my gosh.
And well, we haven't actually met in probably 7 or 8 years. Of course, Jim Moseley passed away. Yeah. And the gal Lisa, who took it over in Los Angeles, who promised that she was going to continue it on, did it for 3 years and finally probably realized it's a heck of a lot of work to put on one of these shows. And I know, because I did it, you know, for quite a number of years.
Oh, gosh.
And I every year I would get bushwhacked. I mean, and now, unfortunately, some of the people that work with me, they have, you know, are deceased, or they've gone on and had families. And you got to devote a lot of time to this. It's not like something you decide over the weekend, I'm going to put on a conference, and you call up a couple of people and expect to have a crowd there, because that doesn't happen. I would spend 6 months promoting these things. And $10,000. I never spent less than $10,000 advertising and promoting a conference. And sometimes I would make it back, and sometimes I would lose money or break even on it. But anyway, it's the 19th to the 22nd in Cleveland, Ohio, and you can just Google it, National UFO Conference. And I understand you're going down to Roswell to give a talk around the same time, and you're involved with Travis Walton now?
Well, I had the honor of being an associate producer on a new documentary about Travis. It is called Travis, The True Story of Travis Walton. It's 90 minutes. There is a version that is making the rounds now, but I'd have to say it's like 97% there. There are a few segments to add. It will be available commercially later this year. And it has brought us together in a way that I've been really pleased about because, like anybody in the field, I have tremendous admiration for Travis. He is one of the greatest spokespeople we ever have had. His event is one of the best documented, and I think, unlike the film, which was good in places but was very problematic in the way that the whole onboard sequence was handled, and I now know why that happened, this tells the true story, and it balances the absolute humanity of the thing with the science. We were lucky enough to have the full cooperation of most of the guys that he was with. The gentleman who did all of the polygraph tests, now in his 80s and retired, Sheriff Gillespie, also in his 80s now and retired, played wonderfully well in the film Fire in the Sky by the late, great James Garner. And we're going to be doing we've been doing screenings of it around the country.
Yeah, I was at the one you had recently.
Yeah, we did the one in New York last month.
That's right.
But we've got one coming up in Memphis on July 1st, I think. And then that weekend of July 4th, we'll be screening it again in Roswell, where I'm really pleased to be returning for the first time in a couple of years. And also for the first time going to get out to the crash site on this one, which I've been looking forward to. But the other aspect of it is that come this November, guys, it is, and I think it's November 5th, it is the 40th anniversary of Travis Walton's experience. And last year, a number of wonderful volunteers put a tremendous amount of work into creating what we called the first annual Skyfire UFO Summit. And this year, it's going to be amped up considerably.
I might go to this one, actually. Yep.
It's going to be
great.
It's going to be historic. And part of the full package, even though it comes on the Thursday night, which I believe is the 5th, is that for those that have signed up for it, we are going to take these people out to the location at night with Travis, and we will get to walk the walk and relive it with him. And then it's going to be several days of speakers and several events in a very remote part of Arizona. Travis decided to opt for location as close as possible and not, some cushy hotel. The fact is that I think this is going to be one for the books as far as I'm concerned, but I'm really proud of my involvement in the documentary. And again, you can order it now off of the producer's website, which is called onwings.com, wings spelled WINGES. But if you wait a few months, a fully complete version, which will include a segment that's being produced or just was finished a couple of weeks ago, recreating some of his experience on board in a more authentic way. And I should jump in here and just give you a 2-minute capsule of how it worked out. I think you guys certainly, and a lot of your listeners, Tim, have seen the movie Fire in the Sky, which has a lot of good stuff in it. I think the strongest part is the human aspect. But when we get on board, and it's something everybody has complained about, and if you've read the book, you know it's nonsense. This whole Travis wakes up on the table, and he's covered with this sticky film, and he's got to break through it, and the aliens are really grottier looking than they were, the aliens as opposed to the humanoid ones. And how did that happen? The fact is that it was written by Tracy Torme, who some years before that had written I thought it was very good, a mini-series based on Bud Hopkins' Intruders and Missing Time. That starred Mayor Winningham, Richard Crenna.
He also was the creator of the show Sliders, which is still with Parallel Universes.
Yeah, it was a quality production. But so this is the deal. The film has been green-lighted. They've got the budget. Tracy's written a very good script. They're on location. They're filming it. They're employing X number of dozen people, and it's a go. And they get a call from the head of the studio. Now, it's a name that you may remember, because I sure did, because Brandon Tartikoff was like a wunderkind over at NBC. In fact, he was the head of NBC, as I recall, when Saturday Night Live kicked in, and he got a lot of credit for it. And he called Travis and Tracy, and this is out of Tracy's mouth last year. He gave an incredibly interesting talk, and he said, you have got to stop filming and rewrite that whole onboard alien abduction sequence. I just saw something on CBS that was essentially the same thing. And Tracy explained to him that he had written that because that was the way it was, and that this was simply another event that replicated that, and that was the true story. That was authentic. Well, Tartikoff didn't want to hear anything about it. He wanted some new, kicky, new kind of whole alien thing. And once again, they explained to him that that would be completely unauthentic, and the fact is that this is the way it is, and you can't make up anything better. And what he said to them was, let me put it this way in so many words. If you do not rewrite that to my satisfaction, I will pull the plug on this. The studio will take the multi-million-dollar loss, and you will all be out of work. Now, it was Travis's idea to go with that device because one abiding fact of his experience on board, he could breathe, there was oxygen, but not what we experience. It was, he felt he was always needed more air, that he couldn't get enough, that it was lower oxygen content, and it gave that claustrophobic feeling. So they used that allegorical device, and that is what happened. It was not an attempt to make it look silly or anything. It was a studio exec who was an idiot and decided that we needed some new kind of alien thing. Well, tell that to anybody that's had the experience. Anyway, that's basically that part of...
You know, the crazy thing about the whole thing is, Peter, that when you actually read the book and then you watch the movie, what's in the book is far more interesting and far more amazing than what they put in the film itself. The film, they just went for like this kind of like shock value almost type of feel. But the book is so much better.
Yeah, for me, the thing that really worked about the film was the human tension, the law enforcement people. The fact that, you know, families were shattered around this, that these guys were accused of murder, that by the time Travis was released and left on the road 5 days later by this thing, which he had, you know, he looked up, he saw it hovering above him 50 feet or so, and then it was gone, that you know, if a logger went missing in Arizona, it ain't going to make the international news. However, superimpose on that the logging crew's contention that, you know, there was this UFO incident and that he seems to have been taken, and the law enforcement people feeling that it was probably more likely that these rough and tumble guys, you know, got into something and something terrible happened and one of them got killed and they hid the body. Murder, UFOs, alien abduction. By the time he returned, this was an international story. And the attention on him began that day around the world. And he was not a classic abductee like my sister or so many other people that, you know, populate that area of experience. He was a macho guy who, you know, by his own admission, he jumped out of the cab. He wanted a better look. You know, he was the one who was going to get closest to it. The other guys were freaking out, get back in. And he realized he had made a very bad judgment call. He was at the right place at the exact wrong moment. And that is the basis. But yeah, one of the things, and everybody should have Fire in the Sky in their UFO library. He had 1 year of college. He's a totally untrained writer and no ghostwriter. He wrote that whole damn book himself, and it is first rate. I'm the biggest compliment I could ever give Larry Warren, my friend, soul brother, and co-author on our British bestseller, The Left at Eastgate, about the Rendlesham Forest incident, is that he wrote his whole part. I've had people come up to me over the years and, you know, try to buttonhole me and get me to say, oh, you wrote it for Larry or something, which I find extremely insulting. Witnesses can write their own stuff just fine. And there have been a number of witness accounts that are superb. I think that Debbie Jordan Cabell, who is the central figure in Bud Hopkins' Intruders case, did a brilliant job as well with her sister in a follow-up book to Intruders called Intruders, The Story Continues. But You're right, Tim. It's a wonderful book, and it really is well written. Again, there are parts of the film I really
Angel, by the
like,
way.
but that book is awesome.
Well, like father, like son, because in my book that we just came out with, and we're going to have you tell the story in a few minutes about your sister and your experience, the Shirley MacLaine meets the Palladians, I have the incident where Tracy Torme's father, Mel Torme, the singer, had an experience. Yes. Had an experience while walking his dog through Central Park many years ago, where he saw, I forget whether it was one or two bright objects in the sky. And I remember meeting Tracy Torme, and he told me, he said, my father said that was the most accurate article that was ever written about him and his entire career, which kind of proved that the Inquirer, well, people think, well, yellow journalism and the Inquirer made up this stuff, or they made up quotes. Well, they didn't. They were the only publication over the years that I can think of that actually had a fact checker. They would want me, if I did an interview with somebody, they would want a copy of the tape. And they would actually call that person up and get the verification that I didn't just make it up, out of my head, So anyway, I want you to, in a few minutes, tell the story about your experience with your sister, Helen Wheels. But I want to get back to Nick for a minute. Nick, are you planning any talks coming up in the next month or so?
Yeah, I'm actually speaking next weekend at the Contact in the Desert conference out in Joshua Tree. And what I'm speaking about is an area that actually doesn't get covered that much. It's all the Freedom of Information Act files that have been released on the contactees. They don't realise how extensive a lot of these FBI files are. There's files on Adamski, Van Tassel, George Hunt Williamson, Truman Bethram, Frank Strangers, and also in the UK, the Aetherius Society and George King. And so I'm going to be doing a PowerPoint presentation on how a lot of this was sort of driven by the culture of the period. The FBI, from the files, you can tell they were clearly concerned by the fact that a lot of the contactees were saying, well, the Space Brothers want us to disarm our nuclear weapons, and et cetera, et cetera.
No money system.
That's right, no money system.
No free medical.
They were deeply concerned. They were very they were very
Can we vote for them for president?
Yeah. Well, Gabriel Green ran for president, if you remember.
Right.
And he was the head of the Amalgamated Flying Saucer Clubs of America that Robert Kennedy was actually a member of.
Right. We've got that wonderful artifact. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there, and I guess Contact in the Desert has become the largest event of its type. Although back in 1990, we did the original Contact in the Desert. We had a beautiful hotel in downtown Palm Springs and had all of the contactees, including members of most of whom were still alive at the time. And we had, in fact, Van Tassel's Daniel Boone, who tells this great story about how he was going to the outhouse one night, and of course in the middle of the desert, so he didn't have to put on his jeans or his overalls, and he went out into the desert buck-ass naked to go down to the outhouse, and here come the aliens inviting him aboard the craft. So
and with nothing to wear.
There you go. I mean, you got to be
naked.
Gee. But they didn't seem to mind, because I guess on some of the planets they are nudists.
Well, it's like, a cat. They don't wear clothes, and, we don't make a big deal out of it.
Yeah, who cares? So anyway, besides, Daniel Boone's beard is so long, it covers...
No. Stop right there. FCC is listening.
This is the internet, buddy. There's no FCC here.
Yeah, if you saw the Travel Channel program that I was on a couple of weeks ago, Daniel Boone is sitting there. His beard has gotten longer and it's gotten wider, and the hair mat comes right down to it. And he's sitting there with a baseball cap, with the Van Tassel's grandson right behind the Integratron that they don't have the key to, because no, you know why? Because Van Tassel was married twice, and so this is a different spouse, and the other spouse, I guess, had the Integratron and they sold it, and it's all. But they're still right back there. You can't miss them. Yeah,
Well,
and
who
here
knows
they
what
are on
feelings are
TV in his long white beard. Good old Daniel Boone. So anyway, we had this Contact in the Desert, and it was a great show. We had Robert Weiss, who did of course, The Day the Earth Stood Still. He was
I
our
would have loved to have met him.
keynote speaker. Unfortunately, we had the event in July, and in July in Palm Springs,
It's
it never
130
gets below
degrees.
100 degrees, and we did not have a great turnout. I mean, we had a couple of hundred people, but it should have been much more. And we
Yeah.
got all the facilities in the hotel for free because it was a weekend where they knew they couldn't rent it to anybody else. And that's
That
what
happens all the time.
yeah, yeah. Well, it does actually, because that was one of the things. Now, when I first started doing conferences, I would get people from all over the world. I mean, they came from Iceland, they came from Ireland, they came from the Netherlands, they came from Sweden, and so I would work a deal with the hotel. Hey, I'll pack your room on a weekend when nobody else is in town. Just give me the facilities and don't charge me. And we worked with a couple of small places in like Mesa and Phoenix, Arizona, and we would pack the place. We would rent 110 rooms for the hotel. Harder to do that now because you can watch all this on TV and you can hear us. You don't have to go out to see us, although I would hope that people would, because you can hear us every week on Unraveling the Secrets on the PSN Radio Network.
That's a shameless plug.
So true, though. And on Skywatchers Radio, by the way, on Wednesday.
That's right. Yes. Well,
10 p.m.
I believe in shameless plugs. And
Well,
speaking
if you're
of
going to
plugs,
be a plug, make it shameless. Absolutely.
I believe in being shameless at all times.
Speaking about shameless,
so did Daniel Boone.
I have a story that I have to go on the record with, and I hope people will think well of me afterwards, because I'm admitting something that should never get out into the public realm. How I met Nick Redfern. Nick and I met in the summer of 1997 in Rugeley in Yorkshire. I knew who Nick was for years before then, because Nick, I think starting when he was 3 years old, was writing letters to the Ministry of Defense demanding information.
And writing books.
A lot of it around Rendlesham. He was actually born in the forest. And I had all these great letters signed by these guy, Nick Redfern. They're on the public record, demanding information, proving that, this person lied, or that we had radar returns in that day in December. And this was where Larry and I were going to meet him. We were on our 15-city speaking tour. It was an amazing moment in our lives after years of working away with very little recognition, except from people like you, Tim. We had a bestseller. And in fact, for part of the summer of 97, I'm ridiculously proud to say that we were several points in the top 10 ahead of a writer named John le Carré, whose new novel was The Tailor of Panama. When we were, I think, number 7, he was number 9 for several weeks, which for me was stranger than UFOs. That blew my mind that we actually had that position. And we knew we were going to meet Nick that evening in the pub attached to where we were staying.
Of course, where else would you meet him?
Yeah, and all I knew about Nick
sense.
was that he was, tall, he was British, and he shaved his head. So I get down there before Larry, and I see a guy at the bar who meets that basic description, and I sit down next to him. He's British, he has no hair, and he seems affable enough, and I say hi. And he says hi, and I said, it's really good to finally meet you. And he looks at me like, well, all right then. And he's got a mate next to him, and he looks at him. And I start to get into what I felt was a conversation. I felt, gee, I mean, he may be a good researcher, but he seems a bit standoffish. And I turn around, and I look, and I see at the door my friend and co-author Larry Warren and a guy who actually was the real Nick Redfern. And they're giving me a look like the kind of look you don't want people to give you the very first time you meet them. And I felt like, well, a certain kind of moron. I won't characterize it by the word I was going to use on the air because the FCC doesn't like it. But that's how I met Nick.
You can always say, though, that now you've experienced picking up a guy. You know how it kind of feels.
I'm sure that there was that thought, too. When I realized that I had made this faux pas, I excused myself. He nodded in agreement that was fine with him. And, we had a really nice evening together. We drank alcoholic beverages and ate and laughed and made friends. And I will also say, I am possibly one of the few people in ufology who knew Nick Redfern before he wrote the first of his 487 books. This was
your story.
Right before that. No, I take that back. I take it back. Because that summer, A Covert Agenda came out. And you
it came out in September, so you did maybe before the book came out.
But you had written it. And
but it wasn't out. Yeah.
Right, but that was the first, and it's 480. No, it just clicked a notch because a new book came out. You are
but that was
the most
cool.
disciplined.
I remember because you were in the air. You stayed at Irene's for like a week or so. We had like a cool time just hanging out.
We did. It was a great way to get to meet anybody, and then you started to become the person now known as Nick Redfern, as opposed to the Yorkshire guy who almost, was about to have a book out and who had just been, a pain in the ass of Her Majesty's government for years beforehand. And I have to tell you, Nick, my sister Helen, who you guys, without realizing it, had a mutual admiration society. Helen truly was one of the pioneer artists in the genre that became known as punk and literally exploded on the stage of CBGB's starting in 1976. And like a lot of abductees, she was not very comfortable reading books about the abduction phenomena. I mean, Bud, who adored her, gave her copies of all his books and, inscribed them. She'd read part of them and then lay them down. But she read A Covert Agenda from cover to cover. You gave that to me, and it was a great book for her, and she, there was a real connection there. I'm just so sorry you two never met, because you've got more in common with her than anybody else in ufology, being an amazing metalhead musicologist yourself. But I
was just going to say that I'm sure we probably would have spent the entire night talking about music.
Oh, God, you totally ignored me. Absolutely true.
There is a photo that I pasted on Facebook today announcing the show, and it's a photo of Helen, and I believe that it was taken of a performance that she gave in the UK, which I found on the internet.
I don't think so. I don't know. I see it here. No, I think that is. Yeah. I'll tell you what. I think that is either from the from CBGB's or the Cat Club, or, believe it or not, the Peppermint Lounge. Yeah.
Well, it did say UK. Maybe it was published in a magazine there or something. But I do know that when I found it said UK on it.
Or maybe it was misspelled. Are you okay? And somebody got that wrong.
Or it could be the photo credit UK or something like that. Who knows? Yeah. And anyway, but Peter, in the book, Shirley MacLaine meets the Palladians, the amazing flying saucer experiences of celebrities, rock stars, and the rich and famous, which includes all of us naturally. I do have this article based on an interview that I did many years ago with Helen. Yeah. I think over Chinese dinner at the.
It was always going to be Chinese or Indian.
You're right.
Makes sense.
It's always food. There you go. Anyway, why don't you got to relate? I know we don't have too much time left, but you have to relate the experience that obviously set you off, because if it wasn't for your sighting and her abduction, there would be no Peter Robbins.
I sure wouldn't be talking to you guys now.
That's
I'd be living,
right, yeah.
A relatively sedate life, hopefully as a painter in New York City, thinking guys like you were out of your friggin' minds. But in fact, I am now one of you.
That's right.
And what happened, as succinctly as I can put it, was we were born in New York City, but our parents moved us out to a really idyllic little village on Long Island, about 30 miles east of Manhattan, called Rockville Center, where we kind of came of age. It was the best of both worlds, close to the city, and this charming, laid-back kind of childhood. And when I was 14 and Helen was just 12, there came a late morning in June of 1961, at least that's what we were able to put together as close as possible, when we finally talked about it more than 14 years later. The event itself did not trigger my interest. In fact, it became, obviously, if I have other repressed memories from childhood, I don't know what they are, but it became the repressed memory of my childhood, which I'd have to characterize as a pretty lucky and happy one, no question about it. We were playing on the front lawn, as kids do, and it was just one of those times in quiet little suburban neighborhood where there was nothing going on. It was a beautiful day, cloudless sky, no ice cream man. We don't remember any other kids playing, nobody on the street, not uncommon for that neighborhood. And I caught something out of my right peripheral vision. And I have relived this in 3 different hypnotic regressions, one with Bud Hopkins, one with one of my real mentors besides Bud, the late, great police detective Pete Mazzola, who, God, had he lived, and he was taken much too early, he might well have become the most, certainly one of the most significant figures in UFO studies in America, a tough, no-nonsense Italian-American Brooklyn, New York City police detective who was also a crack UFO investigator and passionate about the subject. And I caught something out of my right peripheral vision, and I either said to my sister, who was about 6 feet to my left, "Look," or "Helen." And as she looked up, they stopped. It was 5 silvery white, disc-shaped objects. They were ellipses. They were like tipped dinner plates. You guys know what I mean. And they were totally unambiguous. This was as good a daylight sighting as anybody could have. There was no misunderstanding. They were oval, and they were metallic, not like stainless steel, more like subdued, like if you brushed aluminum or something. They were in a very precise V, as in Victor, formation. And I swear to God, we both agreed that they were close enough that we could make out regular detailing around the edge of each that was lighter than the surface of the shapes themselves. And it would be the only thing I could have ever been able to compare it to would be windows on a commercial aircraft at an appreciable difference where you can at least see them. And they just hung motionless over the neighbor's house, the Parker's house across the street. If you asked me how big they were, I couldn't tell you. If they were a few thousand feet up, they were the size of a Piper Cub. If they were, 12,000 feet up, they were the size of I don't know. But there they were. And we didn't say a word to each other. We just looked. Now, you guys have had the same experience I have. People have come up to us and said, you're somebody I feel comfortable I can tell about my event. And they do. And I have documented informally what I call the checklist response, I'm sure several hundred times. And it goes like this. You look up and you see a thing or things that you cannot identify. And especially if they're pronounced, your logical mind runs through everything that they are not. They're not planes, kites, blimps, helicopters, balloons, reflections from the ground, weird-shaped clouds, flotsam and jetsam. And then you kind of hit the wall. And that is what happened to me. I was not just a straight little kid. At 14, I was still in the Boy Scouts. I mean, I collected rocks and stamps and bugs. I was totally not into sports. I drew, I painted, I read, and I cooked. I was the nerdiest nerd in Nerd City. And I knew, I intuitively understood the ridicule factor. I'm old enough to have seen some of the great B movies on Saturday at the Fantasy Theater in Rockville Center, and I intuited the adult opinion. UFOs, flying saucers are real, of course, in the movies. Otherwise, they're a wonderful, silly invention, except that there they were. And I guess I went into shock to a degree. And to compress the story a bit, I knew if I talked to my little friends, this would get around and I'd be the subject of ridicule. Also at 14, I was becoming extremely interested in something called sex. And it was something I really wanted to have. And I know, we all know, it's a scientific fact.
Here, I thought he was going to say Shakespeare in the Park.
Yeah. Girls, you tell one girl something, and immediately every girl in the world will know it. It's like a vine. It's science. And I thought, I do want to have sex someday with a girl. And if I talk about this, it may well never happen. And you know what, guys? I'm only half
Very
joking.
true. Yeah.
I was, you're 14 years old. You're
That's
a raging mass of hormones. I just wanted to be somewhat taller, have some cool clothes. I'm somewhat short. I don't know if you guys are aware. And to be, accepted as we all did back then. And so I just shut up about it. And later that afternoon, Helen asked me if I wanted to talk about it. And I said no. Well, more than 14 years later, I'm living in Chinatown. I'm following my dream. I am a painter. I'm starting to show my work in downtown galleries. I'm in my mind, I'm a blue-collar intellectual. I'm working as a framing carpenter on and off for years, helping to renovate the old factory buildings in the Soho district, teaching painting at my alma mater, the great School of Visual Arts. I got a great girlfriend. Helen, meanwhile, is living almost a mile north in the East Village, a true poor as a church mouse struggling poet who is making some of her living sewing one-of-a-kind costumes for rockers like the Blue Oyster Cult, her boyfriend Albert Bouchard's group. And this memory came roaring back into my head. I'm pretty sure I know why, and it was a combination of events, namely that it was the weekend before had been the Chinese New Year, and it was still before evil Mayor Giuliani truly cracked down on the fireworks are illegal for the Chinese community there. And given that they had been doing this for 5,000 to 7,000 years, it seemed a shame to a lot of us that it stopped. But if you lived in Chinatown in the old days during the Chinese New Year, you didn't sleep for several days. It was fireworks around the clock, the smell of cordite in your nostrils all the time. I had also gotten a bunch of drawings that my grandmother had given me that she surprised me with, that she saved. It was back in a time when parents didn't save every little thing that their genius did, from when I was a kid. And some of those drawings, not that they related to the subject, but I did them at about that time. And I was going through the drawings. I was kind of overtired. And I was staring at a drawing that I probably did within a month or so of it, having nothing to do with it. Again, you'd have to ask a psychologist, but that memory came roaring back. And I have to tell you, I thought I was going crazy because I immediately remembered it. I knew it was as real as anything that had ever happened to me. And yet your logical mind is saying, wait, how could you have ever forgotten that? That's crazy. And I kind of broke down. I mean, I started to cry. I got very upset. I calmed down. I washed my face. I had a cup of tea and thought, what are you going to do? And I thought, well, there's only one thing to do. You've got to call your sister and find out if she remembers the same thing. At least I had the forethought to think it out enough to realize that if I simply blurted it all out to Helen, and she'd say yes or no, and I'd never really know in my heart if she did remember the same thing. So I called her, asked her if it was a good time to talk, and I set the stage. I described the weather, where we were standing, about how old we were, the time of year, and she stopped me mid-sentence and said, stop, I know what you're talking about. Told me what I remembered, and then said, but there's more, and you're not going to like it. And then, among other things, told me about this memory of seeing a blue beam of light shoot out of one of these things. And what I'm about to say, I've been public with for decades. I'm sure it'll shock some people because, I don't talk about it every day. But she said, I knew what I was seeing was crazy, even as a kid, because you can't see a beam of light come down to the ground during the day. You can only see it like in a thick fog or something like that. And she said, I turned around. You had went to run into the house to tell Mom, which was absolutely factual. I was that anxious at that point. I didn't want to think about it. I just wanted to tell Mom and get out of there. And she said, I turned around and you were in that light. And then the light went out, you went down, and I was lifted off the ground. And I just started to go up. I had no fear. I was fascinated. My hair was flying in the distance. I saw the top of the house. I looked up, and the bottom of one of these things was getting bigger and bigger. And remember, this is 1975. UFO abduction accounts, I think, there was the Hills. There was Sergeant Moody. You may remember that one. It was in the Inquirer, which, by the way, Tim, you're absolutely right. I now realize after a lot of research that the Inquirer's coverage of UFOs was easy for the world to dish on because it was the Inquirer, but it was absolutely spot on in so many cases. In a way, it kind of fed the ridicule factor because it can't be real because it's in the Inquirer. Well, she then went on to describe to me something that I've heard, I'm sure, from several hundred people over the years, which is archetypical fragmented memories of being on board, being on the table, the things that were being said into her head by beings that she described in her first regressive hypnosis with Pete Mazzola and then on to working with Bud, from the point of view of a 12-year-old as little doctors with big heads and big black eyes who talked to her in her head, and one big one. And, being walked through a metal hallway, and I'm listening to her on the phone, and I'm thinking, my God, my sister's gone crazy. And then I caught myself and said, 4 seconds ago, it was okay to have 5 flying saucers with windows hovering over the neighbor's house, but now your sister's crazy. As Tim knows, Helen and I were not just brother and sister. We were the best of friends. We were extremely close. We adored each other. We were adult roommates for quite a number of years in our life. We had an awful lot of fun together. We edited each other's stuff. And my sister wasn't a liar, and she had no reason to do this. And, people say my life changed overnight. Well, my dream of being a painter, a serious New York painter, which I played at for years after, the heart went out of it in those series of seconds. I became completely obsessed with what happened to my sister. And it drove me to a point where I am here, sitting in my office, talking to you guys about the most extraordinary turning point in my life. I didn't want to do this. I felt I had to. And I actually remember sitting with Helen some years later, watching the pilot episode of The X-Files. And at a certain point, we turned to each other and she said, my God, that's you, except that his sister was returned. And I thought, good Lord, this is what has happened to my life. I became this investigative writer in this subject. I mean, it's hardly my only interest, thank God. But there's the story in a nutshell, Tim.
So now, let me ask you a question. Both.
I'm sorry, I don't take any questions after that.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
All right,
one.
Ask me a question.
Just one. Just give him one.
Let me ask you a question, and I've often thought about this. People would say to me, "Oh, you've devoted your entire life to this. Have you ever had an abduction experience?" And no, I haven't. I haven't met the friendly space brothers.
You and I have a very parallel story there. How we got into
this. I had a sighting when I was age 10. I lived in a house that did have some poltergeist phenomena in it, but I don't. Maybe something did happen. Do you think that there's anything, Nick and Peter, to the concept that maybe all of this are in this for a reason? And that's, what I always tell everybody, maybe we shouldn't be sniping at each other's ankles, like you say, because maybe, chosen, it's not like some big biblical thing. I don't claim to be Moses or anything like that, but do you think maybe we have some sort of task to do? I mean, is it more than just coincidence that we're sitting here doing this show every Saturday night, unraveling the secrets on the psn-radio network, when we could be out still chasing girls?
Yeah. Not that this should displace that.
Well, there's actually time. There's actually time to do both. You just have to juggle it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you, my brother.
That's what
After
I
this
found
show, I'm
that
going to go
out
pick up some girls.
That's the
after
thing.
this.
Basically, we are living the dream, still chasing women, and again endorsing those royalty checks, and just dealing with the reality of being world famous in our own minds.
yeah.
I'll tell you the truth, and it's the best answer I can give you. I don't know. I have no idea. It's something any thinking person goes back and forth, is predestination, free choice. You're put on a path, you stumble onto the path. I don't know. I know that many years later, after I was a published author, which my parents were very proud of, though they did wish that I had gotten a more practical career. My folks were extremely supportive of both Helen and I, and my dad, who is very much still with me, watches the documentaries, reads the books, criticizes everything, and is pissed off that he hasn't seen one yet. But I don't know. Anything is possible. I'm guessing if we could rise above everything and know the mysteries of the universe, we would probably learn that both things are actual, that some people, an event happens and it changes your life, and it's random. It's absolutely random. It's a roll of the dice. It wasn't necessarily meant to be. In other cases, yes, maybe there are forces beyond us that some of us intuit or understand or believe in, where, yes. In my case, I have no idea. I know that we're all doing important work. I know that we have made valuable contributions and that we should be proud of ourselves for it. At the same time, all I ever wanted to be when I was a kid, and that I studied for and dreamt about, was be an artist in New York, to paint, to draw, to make sculptures, to make my living doing it in New York City. That was my dream. And frankly, when my career trolley derailed from the track, I was angry. I was frustrated. The heart, that central core of the dream of being a New York artist, I knew I was just playing at it after that. I mean, I continued to teach painting at Visual Arts. I continued to show my work. I still love the arts. I'm a museum maniac. I will probably return to painting in the next few years. I still, thank God, have a consistent creative outlet of over 40 years as a professional photographer, which I love. But I don't know. That's your long answer to your short question, Tim.
Well, you were also Bud Hopkins' assistant, and he certainly was a recognizable name in the art field.
Well, it is. And the way we met was quite wonderful. Less than a year into my obsession, I picked up a copy of The Village Voice, which at the time, no longer with us, but for anybody that not a New Yorker, it was the liberal left weekly that at a certain point became a free newspaper. But I was absolutely dumbstruck. There was a front page article on a major UFO incident that occurred the year before in New Jersey. And it was absolutely the best written article and the best documented one I had read in the months that I had been involved. And, I was starting to build a little library and cutting clippings and all that. And it was written by a guy named Bud Hopkins. And I thought, that name is familiar. I mean, I was living painting, and I had seen his work. And I cold called him in the phone book, introduced myself, told him what I was about and my sister's thing. This is 5 years before he even published Missing Time. And the first thing he wanted to know was he wanted me to describe my artwork, which he was not crazy about. Bud was a late period abstract expressionist. I came of age in the minimal and the conceptual art age. And he was still interested enough that he invited me over for coffee. And on that prophetic day in 1976, I showed up at his door on West 16th Street. We had a cup of coffee and talked about art, life, and UFOs, which is actually the title of his wonderful memoir. And shortly before Bud died, we were sitting at his kitchen table talking about art, life, and UFOs, and we both talked a bit about that day. And who would have imagined that we would have had coffee at that table hundreds of times after talking about the same things. But yes, it's one of the things I'm proudest of in this work. I was Bud Hopkins' assistant on and off for many years of our 35-year friendship.
Well, you know, time is ticking away. We are headed into the future, and we only have a few more minutes to go. And I want to get back to Nick just for a moment. Now, your book, The Secret History, Conspiracies from Ancient Aliens to the New World Order, has just come out. In fact, I got it in the mail from the publisher maybe 3 weeks ago. I understand that you're working on a book about the women in black?
Yeah, actually, I'm about 2/3 of the way through it right now, and a lot of obviously most people, if not everybody's heard of the Men in Black, but I'm sure both of you will recall when John Keel was doing his Mothman research in the 60s in Point Pleasant. Every so often for all the Men in Black reports, there'd be like a woman, alleged census taker or something like that coming round, and there was actually another woman who posed as John Keel's secretary. And so about 2 years ago, I started collecting reports like this and was amazed how many people over the years have been visited by what you can only really call women in black.
Wow.
They kind of look the strange, sort of enigmatic, pale, and in like a black business suit that, a woman would wear. And a lot of interesting stories from the UK as well, where they pose as like... looking after, as far as like children's welfare is concerned, as social workers, as they call them in England. And then when they get in the house, they start asking questions. Have you had any strange dreams? And it turns out that the household actually had, a very weird UFO experience. So I'm hoping to complete it within the next few months, and hopefully it'll be sort of a new angle for people to see on the Man in Black mystery, which I think actually is all interlinked with things like the black-eyed kids and the shadow people. I think it's all part of and parcel of a bigger mystery, and I think the women in black issues are sort of connected with that as well.
Yeah. Now you've written, I don't know, several dozen books, in all honesty. I think next to Brad Stagger and maybe myself, you're certainly right up there with a number of titles, and most of them are really exciting and very interesting and well-written books by all means. What are like your two or three favorite titles?
That I've done, you mean, or other people's?
Yeah, no, yours. Yeah.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Yeah, no, your books, your titles.
Oh, well, I actually would say The Real Men in Black, because that's one that really, a subject that really fascinates me. And also a book I did called Wild Man, which deals with like historical reports of wild man and Bigfoot type creatures reported throughout the UK going back like 1,000 years. And that's an area you don't get to see covered very much, is sort of, ancient wild man type reports in the UK. Yeah. So it's very much sort of folkloric and historical and mythology. And so I was pleased to be able to get that one out as well. So.
Now, my favorite, and I have to admit the title has just slipped my mind here, is the one that you wrote about the people in the government thinking that UFOs may involve demonology.
Oh, Final Events. Yeah, that's a strange story, that one.
Oh, that's a great one. And of course, your a book on the Roswell, your different take on the Roswell incident.
Well, I always, try and, if you write the book, I always try and, provide the reader with something new. And I mean, to get back to Peter, I think that was what was so important about Left at Eastgate, is over the years there have been numerous books written about Roswell. But what we had with Left at Eastgate was, with Larry, it was straight from, from the witness's mouth. Yeah. And what made it unique was you had Peter being able to give like his perspective and balance, and Larry was the guy right inside it. Peter was the guy who could look at it from the outside in, and we'd never had a book like that before, which was like a real traumatic story in many respects of how Larry's life was changed and how Peter came into it. And in many respects, Left at Eastgate, not only is it a great UFO book, but it's about people, and how the subject impacts on them. And I think the way the UFO subject impacts on people is one of the most important aspects of the subject, possibly the most important.
Yeah. The fact is, we're all human. We may never get to the bottom of this mystery, but it may bring us together in some ways that nothing else can.
Well, we won't.
I got one thing. I got one thing to interject, gentlemen, before we go off air. Are you guys familiar with what Travis is going through with his grandson at the moment? With the Ethan Medical Fund. Are you guys familiar with what's happening? I wanted to give a special shout out to his grandson and to Travis, and also to give the link out for anybody who wants to go and donate money to the GoFundMe account. It's right now at 4,800. They're trying to raise $10,000 for all the medical expenses for little Ethan, who is fighting for his life. I've made a donation. I'm not saying it just to brag about it, but I think everybody who cares about Travis, cares about his family, go out there, give a donation, $5, $10, whatever it is. Every little helps. Go to GoFundMe.com/L5705C, which is a weird URL. So the best way to actually find it, if you can't find it that way, you could Google Ethan Medical Fund, Travis Walton. You'll find it right away. If not, you can go to skywatchersradio.com. There's a banner right on there. Click on it. Go to the GoFundMe page. Please donate. Help is a good cause.
Thanks so much for that. You can go to Travis's Facebook page as well.
Also, yep.
I want to thank all of you for being on Unraveling the Secrets this evening. It's been a great program. You two are both fascinating guests. You've contributed a lot to the subject. And Nick, you will be on Skywatchers, which is Angel's show, just coming up in a week or a few days, right?
No. August 5th.
Obviously. Okay, well, it's coming up. And
we got a few months.
This show will be archived shortly, and it will be up on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and just type in Mr. UFO's Secret Files, I think every show now that I've done is up there, along with some very interesting videos. Of course, it's the audios of the show, but it's some great stuff there. And tell your friends about the show, and tell your friends about YouTube.
Tim, don't forget, unravelingthesecrets.com.
There you go, on the PSN Radio Network. And everybody will be here next week with another exciting show. And thank you, Angel, down in Miami, where it's not 55 degrees.
Indeed. Good night, everybody.